You don't have to do this.
Stay out of this.
The dynamic in the hallways of Oak Ridge High was fixed, almost ancient, written in the scuffs on the floorboards and the deliberate eye contact avoided by everyone near the row of battered blue lockers. Everyone knew where they stood, or more accurately, who they were allowed to stand near. Marcus stepped through the heavy double doors on a rainy Tuesday morning, his oversized canvas backpack pulling his narrow shoulders downward. Mason was the kind of senior who moved through. "Look at this, guys," Mason sneered, stepping closer until his shadow completely covered Marcus. "We got ourselves a little genius who thinks he can just walk past without paying the toll. What's in the bag, kid? Homework for me?" Marcus looked up, his expression unreadable, his heart rate steady at 58 beats per minute. "Just books," he said softly, his voice devoid of the tremor Mason was accustomed to hearing. "Just books," Mason mocked, shoving Marcus hard against the cold metal lockers. The bang echoed down the empty hall, making a couple of freshman girls flinch as they hurried past. But inside Marcus, something far older and far more disciplined took over. Instead of stumbling, his legs absorbed the impact seamlessly, his feet planted firmly on the floor in a balanced stance that no 16-year-old at Oak Ridge had ever been taught in gym class. The bell. By noon, word had spread across the cafeteria the way bad news always does. The quiet kid with the thick glasses was going to get pulverized behind the gym after the final bell. People looked at Marcus with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity as he sat alone at a corner table, eating a plain turkey sandwich and reading a biology textbook. He didn't look like a hero. He didn't look like someone who could survive a single punch from a guy like Mason, who bench-pressed 200 pounds and led the varsity football team in tackles. Marcus looked fragile, disposable. What none of them knew, what even his guidance counselor had missed in his file, was the reason Marcus had transferred to Oak Ridge in the middle of the semester. 2 months prior, in a packed auditorium 3 states away, lights flared down on a blue canvas ring. The crowd was deafening, a roar of thousands of voices calling out his ring name. In the red corner, wearing black trunks with subtle gold trim, Marcus had stepped under the ropes for the final round of the National Golden Gloves Junior Lightweight Championship. He had fought through 12 grueling rounds, ducking under hooks, slipping jab after jab, executing precise, lightning-fast counter-punches born from 6 years of relentless, agonizing training. When the referee raised his arm in victory, Marcus wasn't thinking about the trophy or the title. He was thinking about his mother's medical bills, paid for entirely by the regional purse prize he had earned with every drop of sweat on that canvas. He had promised his mother he would keep his fighting life completely separate from his real life. "Out there, you're just a student, Marcus," she had told him from her hospital bed, wiping a smudged sweat band from his forehead. "People fear what they can hurt, but they destroy what they don't understand. Don't let them drag you into their noise." So Marcus kept his gloves in a locked leather trunk under his bed at home. He wore baggy sweaters to hide his shredded, muscular shoulders. He wore fake, non-prescription thick-rimmed glasses to soften his sharp, focused eyes. He deliberately failed the physical fitness assessment in gym class, doing just 5 slow pull-ups before dropping to the floor, pretending to puff for air while his classmates laughed. When 3 o'clock arrived, the sky turned a heavy, bruised purple, casting long gray shadows across the gravel lot behind the gymnasium. A small crowd of 30 or 40 students had gathered, holding up their phones, waiting for the predictable spectacle. Mason was already there, bouncing on his toes, throwing lazy, aggressive jabs into the cold air to entertain his friends. Marcus walked out slowly, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his faded denim jacket. The autumn wind blew dry leaves across the gravel between them. "He actually showed up," one of Mason's friends laughed, slapping Mason on the back. "Don't break him too fast, man. We want a show." Mason stepped forward, cracking his knuckles, a mean grin spreading across his face. "Last chance, nerd. Hand over your wallet and do my chemistry assignments for the rest of the term, and maybe I'll only break one of your fingers." Marcus stopped 10 feet away. The air was frigid, but his breathing remained deep, rhythmic, and perfectly controlled. He lowered his head slightly, his eyes tracking Mason's shoulders, his hips, his balance point, the instant visual analysis every professional fighter relies on before a round begins. "I don't want to fight you, Mason," Marcus said, his tone flat, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "You don't have a choice." Mason yelled, lunging forward with a wild, telegraphed right haymaker meant to take Marcus's head off. To the crowd, it looked like a blur. But to Marcus, Mason moved in slow motion, his shoulder dropping 2 full seconds before the fist even traveled. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't scream. With a movement so slight it was almost invisible, he ducked his head 2 inches to the left. The wind from Mason's heavy fist whistled past Marcus's ear, missing his temple by a fraction of an inch. Before Mason could recover his balance, Marcus slid his feet into a flawless shoulder-width pivot, stepping fluidly behind Mason's overextended side. He didn't strike back. He simply placed 2 fingers gently against the middle of Mason's back, giving him a slight push that sent the larger boy stumbling 3 steps forward into the dirt gravel. The crowd went dead silent. The laughter stopped instantly. Mason spun around, his face flushing dark red with pure humiliation. "You think you're smart," he roared, dropping his chin and rushing at Marcus like a wounded bull, throwing a fury of sloppy, heavy punches, left, right, right. Marcus moved like a phantom. Slip. Slip. Roll. Duck. He stepped inside the arc of a vicious left hook, his shoulder brushing against Mason's chest, then stepped back out before Mason could grab him. His movements were smooth, effortless, and breathtakingly fast. He wasn't just avoiding the hits, he was floating around them, his feet executing precise ring footwork on the uneven gravel. "Hit him," someone in the back yelled, but no one else spoke. The students watching weren't stupid. They could see that Marcus wasn't running away out of panic. He was dodging every single blow with cold, effortless precision, his hands still tucked casually near his waist. Mason was gasping for air now, his arms heavy, his strikes becoming slower and wilder. He stopped, panting heavily, sweat pouring down his face despite the freezing temperature. "Stand still, you little freak," he wheezed, lunging forward again for a desperate tackle. This time, Marcus didn't step aside. He stood his ground, raised his left hand, and caught Mason's lunging wrist in mid-air, squeezing with a grip forged by years of heavy bag training. Mason froze, trying to pull his arm back, but Marcus's arm was like an iron bar. Marcus stepped in close, staring directly into Mason's wide, terrified eyes. The soft-spoken nerd was gone. In his place stood a young man with an icy, razor-sharp gaze that carried the authority of someone who had survived hundreds of rounds against the toughest fighters in the country. "You swing with your chin up," Marcus whispered softly, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Your weight is completely on your heels. If I hit you right now, you won't wake up until tomorrow." Marcus tightened his grip just enough to make Mason gasp, then slowly let go, stepping back 2 paces. Mason stood paralyzed, his wrist throbbing, staring at Marcus as if he were looking at an alien. He looked at Marcus's hands, calloused, thick-jointed, perfect boxer's hands that had been hidden under long sleeves all day. Mason backed away slowly, his chest heaving, his pride completely shattered, unable to say a single word. He turned and walked away toward the parking lot without looking back, his friends silently following him like defeated soldiers. The crowd stared at Marcus in utter disbelief. No one moved. No one recorded anymore. Marcus quietly adjusted his glasses, picked up his backpack from the grass, and wiped a speck of dust off his jacket. He walked past the silent crowd of students, stepping out onto the sidewalk to catch the public bus home. As the bus rolled through the city streets, Marcus leaned his forehead against the cold glass window, watching the rain strike the surface. He felt no pride in what had happened. There was no joy in proving a point to a bully. The ring was a place of honor, built on respect, discipline, and mutual sacrifice. What happened behind the gym was just sadness, a boy using violence because he didn't know how to carry his own pain, and another boy holding back because he knew exactly what violence could do. When he reached his small apartment, the sweet smell of roasted chicken filled the air. His mother, Sarah, was sitting in her wheelchair near the kitchen window, a blanket draped over her lap. Her hair was thinner now from the treatments, but her eyes brightened the moment her son walked through the door. "How was school, sweetie?" she asked, offering a fragile smile. Marcus hung his jacket on the hook near the door, set his backpack on the floor, and walked over to kiss her cheek. "It was okay, Mom. Just quiet." He sat down beside her, looking at the faded black and white photograph resting on the side table, a picture of his late father wearing boxing boots, standing next to Uncle Julian in an old community gym. Marcus reached out, touching the frame gently. He knew that true strength wasn't measured by how many people you could knock down, but by how many times you could keep yourself upright when the weight of the world was trying to crush you. The next morning at school, everything had changed. The story of what happened behind the gym had spread like wildfire, morphing from a rumor into an absolute legend. People whispered in the hallways as Marcus walked by, making way for him with a new kind of reverence. But Marcus didn't smile, didn't puff his chest out, and didn't acknowledge the newfound attention. He walked to his locker, opened it, and pulled out his history textbook just as he did every day. At lunch, Mason sat alone at the far edge of the football field, staring at his hands, isolated from his usual group of friends who didn't know how to talk to him anymore. Marcus watched him from across the yard. He saw not a villain, but a broken kid carrying something heavy that no one else could see. Slowly, Marcus stood up, walked across the grass, and stopped in front of the bench where Mason sat. Mason looked up defensively, his jaw tightening, expecting mock revenge or humiliation. Instead, Marcus pulled an extra apple from his pocket and set it down on the wooden bench beside Mason. "You have a strong right arm," Marcus said quietly, his voice calm and sincere. "But you throw it with anger. Anger makes you slow, Mason. It makes you predictable." Mason stared at the apple, then looked up at Marcus, his eyes defensive yet visibly trembling. "What are you? Why aren't you laughing at me like everybody else?" Marcus sat down on the far end of the bench, looking out at the empty sports field. "Because I used to fight out of anger, too. Before my uncle taught me that fighting because you hate what's in front of you will destroy you. You only win when you fight because you love what's behind you." Mason was silent for a long moment, the hardness in his face slowly melting away into something vulnerable and exhausted. He lowered his head, resting his elbows on his knees. "My dad, he expects me to get a football scholarship," Mason muttered, his voice cracking slightly. "Every time I miss a tackle, every time I mess up, he tells me I'm worthless. I thought if everybody was afraid of me, at least no one would know I'm an idiot." Marcus looked at him, nodding softly. "You're not an idiot, Mason. You're just carrying a fight that isn't yours." For the next 20 minutes, two boys who had stood as enemies 24 hours prior sat together on a cold wooden bench, speaking not of fear or power, but of pressure, expectations, and the heavy burden of trying to live up to broken dreams. Word eventually reached the principal, and by the end of the week, Marcus's hidden identity as a national champion came fully to light when a regional newspaper ran a feature story on his upcoming tournament defense. But instead of turning his talent into a weapon for social status, Marcus asked the school for permission to open an after-school boxing club in the old basement gym, not to teach kids how to fight each other, but to teach them how to master themselves. On the first day of the club, 15 kids walked down the narrow concrete stairs. Among them were the quiet kids who had been pushed around, the nerds who hid in the library, and sitting right on the front bench, wearing a pair of old athletic shoes, was Mason. Marcus stood at the front of the room, wrapping his wrists with white canvas tape, his movements rhythmic and precise. He looked around the room at every single face, the afraid, the angry, the lonely, and the discarded. "In this room," Marcus said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls, "we don't learn how to hurt people. We learn how to breathe when the world gets loud. We learn how to stand our ground when everything inside us tells us to run. The hardest fight you will ever have isn't with the person standing in front of you in a ring. It's with the voice inside your head telling you that you aren't enough. He walked over to Mason, handed him a pair of hand wraps, and showed him how to protect his wrists properly. Mason looked down at his hands, then up at Marcus, offering a subtle, genuine nod of respect. True power never needs to scream, boast, or destroy. The strongest people walk among us silently, carrying light in their hearts and iron in their spirits, using their strength not to knock others down, but to build a foundation where everyone can finally stand up.